What's up, YouTube? Capital G here. Alright, so we're going to be talking plants in this video and why it is that I think the deck failed miserably. I believe that the deck failed miserably for one simple reason: poor construction. A lot of people looked at plants this format. They saw Spore being unbanned. They saw the Breed Dragon at 2, and they were like, oh my goodness, this is going to be the Roxer. Plants are going to be amazing like they were 2 formats ago. And that just wasn't the case. You had the biggest plant enthusiasts like my Uncle WK Dad, Billy Break. Early in the format, they picked up the deck, and they all came to the same general notion: underwhelming. And the reason I believe that is because, well, let's just say this. You have 2 basic builds of plants. You have Plant Synchro, which can also be classified as things like Chaos Plant, Synchrocentric, and that's where you run the main 3 plants, and then you run support cards like Card Trooper, the Breed Dragon, which also facilitate the big plays or get the monsters in the graveyard that you need. And then you have Junk Doppel. And the reason I include Junk Doppel in this is because pretty much it's enhanced by plants. You run the same key cards as far as the extra deck goes, synchroing. I mean, you use the same basic power plays. You get there the same ways with cards like Foolish Burial and 1-for-1. Main cards you're trying to make are things like, Tech Genocypher Librarian, Formalon Synchron, Shooting Star Dragon, and then obviously like Quasar. And the reason that I think that this deck failed is one of these decks I just don't believe is very good, and that's the latter. I look at a deck like Junk Doppel, and it is absolutely all flash and no substance, and I'll explain my reasoning. First off, I think the deck is completely boss monster or bust. I look at it, I've seen it being tested, and it's like if you don't bring out Quasar, the deck just completely falls apart because none of the other monsters offer any protection, and for the most part, they don't really do anything by themselves. Another problem that I have with the deck is that fact that none of the cards do anything by themselves. You look at things like, Level Eater and Quick Draw and, Junk Synchron. And it's just like these cards are great when you're looping and you're putting Quasar on the board, but if you draw a Quillbit Hedgehog by itself or, you open with one of these other cards, like, they don't do anything. What does Doppel Warrior do when you don't have another card to, go along with it? And that's one of the biggest reasons why I like Chaos Plants over this deck is because, when you start the deck and you play monsters that work by themselves, things like Card Trooper and Snowman Eater and the Breed Dragon and Gravekeeper Spy, it gives you a much stronger foundation. Guys, let me give you some quick advice. If you're ever lucky enough to actually build your own house, don't start by spending money on the cabana and the pool. Start by building a foundation. All great football teams are built in the trenches. I mean, you don't start your football team with a diva wide receiver. That shit comes later. And that's basically what Junk Doppel is. It reminds me a lot of, a lot of the pro sports teams in Los Angeles. I mean, you look at the Lakers and it's like, oh my goodness, we've got all this star power. We've got, Dwight Howard and Steve Nash, and you don't play defense. You can't make free throws in the 4th quarter, and you lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers last week. What? And that's basically what Junk Doppel is. It's all flash. It's boss monster or bust. The deck can't play defense at all. And if you ever try and thwart the deck with a power lockdown card, it absolutely falls apart. I'm talking like Skill Drain, Macro, Defissure, Rivalry of Warlords, Goes in Match. I mean, the deck can't fight through any of them. At least with Chaos Plants, when you're playing a more defensive game, when you have actual monsters that can stand alone and get you some type of benefits, when you're playing things like Spirit Reaper and Snowman Eater and Gravekeeper Spy, things that can sit on the board for a couple of turns, yeah, you might not be able to power through those roadblocks your opponent is putting up on against you, but at least you can stall out for a couple of turns. Give yourself some time. Not to mention, when the game doesn't go how you want it to go, and this happens all the time in Yu-Gi-Oh! I talk about this on my channel all the time. This is why I love Macro Rabbit right now, is because, how does your deck work when you open with a less than optimal hand, when your win condition doesn't go the way you want and you basically have to grind down victories? A deck like Doppel Plants or Junk Doppel, it absolutely falls apart because everything needs another card to work. But in Chaos Plants, I mean, outside of the plant monsters, a lot of these monsters can sit on the field by themselves. I mean, you can sit a Sangan or a Night Assailant, you top a Tour Guide, and it's like, okay, I have legitimate plays. One thing that I think that plants need to drop are these hand traps. I think it was a nice fad. Pretty much most people have realized that hand traps just kind of suck right now. I mean, we're not even just talking the macro rabbit element. You know, you look at a card like Valor, it's absolutely garbage against Mermills because, I mean, yeah, it's good against Diva, but, you know, all of their monsters have cost effects, which means that Valor doesn't stop them, which means that Valor doesn't really do jack shit against the deck. So it's like, yeah, this helps me summon a BLS, but is it really worth me, you know, potentially losing against maybe the most popular deck in the format when it's only good against windups? You know, I also think that the deck needs to play more defense. I mean, cards like Book of Moon and Torrential Tribute need to be absolutely maxed. This is actually what I would pull out for hand traps. I mean, for every one game that you stop windups with a hand trap, you're probably going to lose 2 against a deck like Macro Rabbit or Mermail Atlantean because, you know, you had a Valor in your hand and your opponent had Macro and they just summoned Rabbit, summoned Dokka, and just won. So, you know, I'm not content basically, you know, saying, okay, well, if I don't have Dark Hole, I guess I just lose to Dino Rabbit. You know what I mean? So, my main points of this video is that if Plant Synchro wants to be a viable deck, because, you know, granted, the time in the format right now might not be the most optimal time, but I think that Chaos Plants is a far better version. And when I say Chaos Plants, I just mean Plant Synchro. But I mean a version that the monsters all don't have to have another like, the monsters don't need to necessarily work in unison. You know, the monsters can all basically be their own island. I mean, you can summon a card trooper and know, well, if it dies, at least I get another card to draw. You know, worst case scenario, I can set my Debris Dragon because it has a 2000 ass. You know, I feel confident setting a Snowman Eater against windups because, you know, even if they do their worst, I'm probably going to be able to kill a monster. If I set my Spirit Reaper, I can stall for a turn or so. You know, against, when you're playing a deck like Jump Doppel, I mean, it's all gravy when everything goes according to plan and you bring out Quasar, but what happens when, you know, your opponent puts that Dokka on board and you don't have Dark Hole? It's just like, okay, I lose. What happens when you run into, you know, a Gozen match because Mermail sided it in? It's like, okay, I guess I lose. You know what I mean? Against, you know, at least with Chaos Plants, maybe you stall out for a couple of turns sitting on a Gravekeeper Spy and you draw outs to that. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you later.